They're not ours to keep, Vanessa. The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a dying fire. Vanessa Brennan's hands trembled as she held the tiny girl closer to her chest, feeling the child's heartbeat against her own. The boy sat silent on the wooden floor, his blue eyes watching everything, understanding nothing. Then whose are they, Samuel? Her voice cracked. Who would leave two babies in a storm to die? Samuel turned away, his broad shoulders tense beneath his dust-covered shirt. Outside their small homestead, the Wyoming wind howled like a wounded animal, rattling the windows that Vanessa had so carefully curtained. The storm that had brought the children to their doorstep 3 days ago had finally broken, but another storm, one made of law and consequence and heartbreak, was just beginning. Before we embark on this incredible journey together, I have a small, heartfelt favor to ask. Please subscribe to my channel, give this video a thumbs up. It costs you nothing but means the world to me. And let me know in the comments which beautiful corner of the world you're watching from. Your support truly makes all the difference. The little girl whimpered and Vanessa's heart shattered all over again. For 6 years she had prayed for this. 6 years of empty rooms and silent breakfasts and the weight of her husband's unspoken disappointment. 6 years of watching other women in Redemption Creek cradle their babies while her arms remained eternally, painfully empty. And now, when God had finally answered, albeit in the strangest, most terrifying way, Samuel wanted to give them back. The sheriff's coming tomorrow, Samuel said quietly, still facing the window. We have to do what's right. What's right? Vanessa had spent her whole life doing what was right, following her father from Boston to this God-forsaken stretch of prairie, marrying Samuel Brennan because he was good and honest and needed a wife, keeping his house, mending his clothes, pretending that being a good wife was enough when her body refused to give him the one thing that would make their marriage complete. The little boy stood up then, his small hand reaching for his sister. He was perhaps 3 years old, maybe 4, too thin, too quiet, with bruises on his arms that told stories Vanessa wasn't sure she wanted to hear. But it was what happened next that changed everything. The boy looked directly at Samuel's back, then at Vanessa's face, and whispered one word. Just one word that made Vanessa's knees buckle, and Samuel spin around, his weathered face suddenly pale. That word would haunt them both, in the best and worst ways possible, for the rest of their lives. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it really started, 3 days earlier, when the storm rolled in from the mountains and brought with it 2 tiny souls that would either save the Brennan marriage or destroy it completely. You need to understand something about Samuel and Vanessa Brennan before I tell you the rest. They were good people living in a hard place, doing their best with a broken dream. Samuel had built their homestead 7 years ago with his own hands, every log and nail a testament to his determination to carve out something permanent in a land that killed the weak and swallowed the unlucky. He was 32 years old, with the kind of face that smiled rarely, but meant it when it did. All sharp angles and sun-weathered skin, with eyes the color of creek water after a rain. Vanessa was 26, educated at a teacher's college in Boston, the daughter of a professor who died of consumption before he could see his daughter married. She'd come west as a mail-order bride, though she hated that term. Samuel had needed a wife. She'd needed a future. It was supposed to be simple. Nothing about their marriage had been simple. The problem, though neither of them would speak it aloud, was the children that never came. Or rather, the children that women went before Vanessa could feel them move. 3 times in 6 years. 3 tiny graves on the hill behind the house, marked with wooden crosses that Samuel repainted every spring. After the 3rd loss, something had broken between them. Not their commitment to each other. They were both too honorable for that. But the easy companionship they'd once shared. Samuel threw himself into his work, expanding his cattle operation, mending fences that didn't need mending. Vanessa kept the house immaculate, baked bread no one was hungry for, and tried not to think about the empty bedroom next to theirs. They were polite, they were kind, they were dying of loneliness in a house built for a family they'd never have. Then came the storm. It started on a Tuesday afternoon in late September when the sky turned the color of a bruise and the wind began speaking in tongues. Samuel was out checking on the cattle in the north pasture, and Vanessa was inside kneading dough for supper when she heard it. a sound that didn't belong to the storm. At first, she thought it was an animal, a wounded coyote maybe, or a fox caught in something. But there was a rhythm to it, a human quality that made her flour-covered hands still. She wiped them on her apron and opened the door. The wind nearly ripped it from her hands. Rain slashed sideways, cold and vicious, turning the yard into a sea of mud. Vanessa squinted into the gray fury of it, seeing nothing but her husband's barn and the mountains beyond, obscured by sheets of rain. Then she heard it again, clearer this time. A cry, a child's cry. Vanessa didn't remember making the decision to step outside. One moment she was in the doorway, safe and dry, and the next she was stumbling through mud, her skirts heavy with water, rain stinging her face like thrown gravel. "Hello," she called out, her voice swallowed by thunder. "Is someone there?" The crying came from near the well, a structure Samuel had built too far from the house in Vanessa's opinion. But men never listened about such things. She pushed forward, her boots sinking into mud with every step. And then she saw them. Two children huddled together in the mud beside the well. The older one, a boy, had wrapped his arms around a smaller child, a girl, trying to shield her from the rain with his own tiny body. They were both soaked through, their clothes hanging in rags, their faces pale as milk except for the mud that streaked them. The girl was screaming. The boy was silent. "Oh my God," Vanessa breathed, and then she was running. She grabbed the girl first, who couldn't have been more than 2 years old, pulling her against her chest. The child's screams intensified, her small fists beating against Vanessa's collarbone. The boy didn't fight when Vanessa reached for him with her free arm. He just looked at her with eyes too old for his face and let himself be lifted. Getting back to the house with 40 pounds of terrified, struggling children was like trying to swim upstream in a flood. Vanessa slipped twice, nearly falling both times, but somehow managed to keep her feet. The boy helped, wrapping his thin arms around her neck and holding on with surprising strength. When she finally burst through the door, gasping and soaked, she set them both down on the braided rug in front of the fireplace. The girl was still crying, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. The boy just stared at the fire, his lips blue with cold. Vanessa flew into action. She grabbed every blanket in the house, wrapped them around the children, and knelt before them, trying to see through the mud and rain to assess for injuries. "It's all right," she murmured, her voice shaking. "You're safe now. You're safe." The girl's cries gradually subsided into hiccups. The boy still hadn't made a sound. "Where did you come from?" Vanessa asked gently, pushing wet hair back from the boy's forehead. "Where are your parents?" The boy's eyes met hers, and Vanessa felt her heart contract. There was something broken in that gaze, something no child should ever carry. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again and looked away. That's when Samuel came home, slamming through the door with the storm at his heels. He froze when he saw the scene before him. His wife kneeling on the floor, two strange children wrapped in their wedding blankets, a puddle of muddy water spreading across the clean planks. "Vanessa?" His voice was careful, cautious. "What in God's name?" "I found them by the well," Vanessa interrupted, her hands still moving over the children, checking for broken bones, for frostbite, for anything that needed immediate attention. "Someone left them, Samuel, in the storm. They were just there." Samuel closed the door and approached slowly, like a man approaching a rattlesnake. He looked at the children, then at his wife's face, and whatever he saw there made him sigh. "I'll get some dry clothes," he said quietly, "and something hot to drink." As he disappeared into the bedroom, Vanessa finally allowed herself to breathe. The girl had stopped crying completely now and was staring at the fire with drowsy eyes. The boy was still watching Vanessa with that unnervingly adult gaze. "What's your name?" Vanessa asked softly. The boy's lips moved, but no sound came out. "It's all right," Vanessa said. "You don't have to tell me now. You're safe here. No one's going to hurt you." But even as she said it, she wondered if it was true, because somewhere out there someone had abandoned these children to die in a storm, and that kind of cruelty didn't just disappear with the rain. The thing about secrets in a small town is that they have a way of surfacing like bodies in a river. You can weight them down all you want, but eventually they float. Vanessa spent that first night alternating between watching the children sleep and staring at her husband across the kitchen table. Samuel had given up his own shirt for the boy, and the sight of that small body swimming in worn cotton made Vanessa's throat tight. The girl wore one of Vanessa's chemises, tied at the shoulders with twine to keep it from falling off. They tried to feed the children, bread soaked in warm milk, but only the girl had eaten, stuffing food into her mouth with both hands like someone who didn't know when the next meal might come. The boy had refused everything, though his eyes had followed every movement of the spoon. "We need to get the sheriff," Samuel had said, his voice low so as not to wake them. "First light, I'll ride into town." "And tell him what?" Vanessa's hands were wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold. "That we found two children in our yard and have no idea who they belong to?" "That's exactly what we tell him." Samuel's jaw was set in that way that meant he'd made up his mind. "This isn't our business, Vanessa. Someone's missing these kids. Someone's looking for them." But Vanessa had seen the bruises, the way the boy flinched when Samuel moved too quickly, the hollow look in both their eyes. "What if no one's looking?" she'd asked quietly. Samuel hadn't answered that. Now it was morning. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and bright. And Samuel was saddling his horse while Vanessa spooned oatmeal into bowls she wasn't sure would be eaten. The children were awake, sitting side by side on the floor where Vanessa had made them a pallet. The girl was humming tunelessly, playing with a wooden spoon Vanessa had given her. The boy just watched the door, his small body tense as a drawn bow. "I'll be back before noon," Samuel said from the doorway, his hat already on. "Don't—" He paused, searching for words. "Just don't get too attached." Vanessa felt something sharp lodge in her chest. "They need names," she said instead of the thousand other things she wanted to say. "We can't keep calling them the children." Samuel's expression softened slightly. "The sheriff will know their names." But after he left, the silence in the house felt enormous. Vanessa set the bowls on the floor near the children and sat down in her rocking chair, trying to project calm she didn't feel. The girl abandoned the spoon and crawled toward the food, eating with the same desperate hunger as the night before. The boy didn't move. "You should eat," Vanessa said gently. "You'll need your strength." The boy's eyes flicked to her face, then back to the door. "He'll be back," Vanessa assured him, though she wasn't sure that's what he was worried about. "My husband, Mr. Brennan, he just went to town to find out where you belong." The boy's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Vanessa tried a different approach. "I'm Vanessa, Mrs. Brennan. This is our home." She gestured around the small, tidy room. "You're safe here. Do you understand? Safe." For a long moment, the boy just stared at her. Then slowly he reached for the bowl and began to eat. Not with the girl's frantic hunger, but with careful, measured bites, like he was rationing something precious. Vanessa felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them away. She stood up, busying herself with dishes, with sweeping, with anything that would keep her hands occupied and her heart from breaking. The girl finished her oatmeal and crawled over to Vanessa, tugging on her skirt. When Vanessa looked down, the child raised her arms in the universal gesture of wanting to be held. Vanessa didn't hesitate. She scooped the little girl up, and the child immediately buried her face in Vanessa's neck, one small hand fisting in her hair. The weight of her was perfect, substantial and real, and everything Vanessa's arms had been empty of for so long. "Well," Vanessa murmured, swaying slightly, "aren't you a sweet thing?" The boy was watching them now, his bowl empty, his expression unreadable. "Would you like me to hold you too?" Vanessa asked. The boy shook his head, a tiny movement, but definite. "That's all right," Vanessa said, "when you're ready." She spent the morning trying to learn about them through observation since they wouldn't or couldn't speak. The girl seemed younger than Vanessa had initially thought, maybe 18 months, barely more than a baby. She clung to Vanessa like a burr, whimpering whenever Vanessa tried to set her down. The boy was harder to read. He was definitely older, maybe 4, with that peculiar awareness that came from seeing too much too young. He followed Vanessa from room to room, always maintaining a careful distance, never quite relaxing. When Vanessa took them outside, the girl on her hip, the boy trailing behind, to show them the chickens and the garden, she watched the boy's reaction carefully. He didn't seem surprised by any of it. He'd been on a farm before, or at least somewhere rural. Do you like chickens? Vanessa asked, pointing to the henhouse where Samuel's dozen birds scratched and clucked. The boy nodded. We have a rooster named Samson, Vanessa continued, encouraged by this small response. He's very loud in the mornings. And we have a cow named Bessie. You probably heard her last night. She's old and mean, but she gives good milk. The boy's eyes tracked a chicken as it darted past, but his expression remained neutral. Vanessa tried to fill the silence with chatter about the farm, about the mountains in the distance, about anything that might coax a word from him. But he remained stubbornly silent, and eventually Vanessa gave up and just let them explore. The girl was delighted by everything: dirt, rocks, chickens, the feel of grass under her bare feet. She laughed when a butterfly landed on her hand, a sound so pure and joyful that Vanessa felt her chest tighten. The boy picked up a stick and drew patterns in the dirt. When Vanessa looked closer, she realized they were letters. Rough, childish letters, but letters nonetheless. You can write, Vanessa breathed. Someone taught you. The boy dropped the stick like it had burned him. No, no, that's wonderful, Vanessa said quickly. That's a good thing. It means… She stopped, not sure what it meant, except that these children had come from somewhere, had been someone's responsibility, had been taught and cared for enough to learn, which made their abandonment all the more horrifying. When Samuel returned just before noon, his face was grim. The sheriff rode alongside him, a weathered man named Bill Tucker, who'd kept the peace in Redemption Creek for 20 years and had seen just about everything the frontier had to offer. Mrs. Brennan, Tucker said, tipping his hat as he dismounted. His eyes immediately found the children, who had frozen at the sound of horses. I understand you've had some unexpected visitors. They were by the well, Vanessa said, her arms instinctively tightening around the girl. In the storm. Just abandoned there. Tucker's mouth pressed into a thin line. Sam told me. Mind if I take a look at them? Everything in Vanessa wanted to refuse, to grab both children and run, but she forced herself to nod. Tucker approached slowly, his movements careful and non-threatening. Hey there, little ones, he said gently. Nobody's going to hurt you. I'm just trying to figure out where you belong. The boy had moved closer to Vanessa, though he still wouldn't let her touch him. The girl had her face buried in Vanessa's shoulder. Do you know their names? Tucker asked. They haven't spoken, Vanessa admitted. Not a word. Tucker crouched down, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. Son, I know you're scared, but I need you to help me out here. Do you remember where you came from? Do you remember your mama and papa? The boy's face went pale, and his eyes, those two old eyes, filled with something that looked like terror. That's enough, Vanessa said sharply. Can't you see you're frightening him? Tucker stood up, sighing. Ma'am, I understand this is hard, but what you need to do, Vanessa interrupted, surprising herself with her own vehemence, is find whoever left 2 babies to die in a storm and make sure they answer for it. Samuel touched her arm gently. Vanessa. But she couldn't stop. Look at them, Sheriff. Really look. Those are bruises on that boy's arms. Old bruises. New bruises. These children weren't lost. They were thrown away. Tucker's expression softened. I know, ma'am, and I promise you, we'll get to the bottom of it. But right now, until we can find their kin or figure out what happened, they'll need to go to the children's home in Cheyenne. The words hit Vanessa like a physical blow. No. The word came out of Vanessa's mouth before her brain could catch up, flat and final as a door slamming shut. Samuel's hand tightened on her arm. Vanessa, we can't just… I said no. Vanessa's voice shook, but not with fear, with fury. With a fierce maternal rage she hadn't known she possessed until that very moment. These children have been through hell already. You're not loading them into a wagon and shipping them off to some institution where there'll be just 2 more mouths to feed. Sheriff Tucker held up his hands placatingly. Mrs. Brennan, I understand your feelings, but the law is clear. Abandoned children become wards of the county until… Until what? Vanessa demanded. Until you find the people who did this? And then what? You give them back? She was shaking now, the girl clinging to her neck like she understood every word. Look at this boy's arms, Sheriff. Look at the fear in his eyes. Someone hurt these children. Someone hurt them badly enough that being left in a storm seemed preferable to staying where they were. The boy had pressed himself against Vanessa's leg, his small hand fisting in her skirt. The gesture was so trusting, so desperate, that Vanessa felt something fundamental shift in her chest. Samuel stepped between his wife and the sheriff, his voice low and measured. "Bill, give us a few days. Let Vanessa clean them up. Make sure they are healthy. We'll keep asking around. See if anyone knows anything. If nothing turns up by week's end, then we'll discuss next steps." Tucker looked between them, his weathered face thoughtful. He'd known Samuel Brennan for 7 years, had watched him build this homestead from nothing, had never known him to be anything but honest and hardworking. "3 days," Tucker finally said. "Aye, Mom. But I'll need to make an official report. And if anyone comes looking for them, you'll let me know immediately," Samuel said firmly, "so I can make sure they have to answer for what they've done." After the sheriff left, the silence in the house was thick enough to choke on. Samuel stood at the window watching Tucker's horse disappear down the trail. Vanessa sat in the rocking chair with the girl in her lap, the boy leaning against her knee. "3 days," Samuel finally said, not turning around. "That's all we have." "Then we better make them count," Vanessa replied. She spent the afternoon giving the children proper baths, heating water on the stove, filling the tin tub, coaxing them into water that made them cry and struggle. The amount of dirt that came off them was shocking. The bruises became more visible with each pass of the cloth. Yellowing marks on the boy's ribs, fingerprint-shaped shadows on the girl's arms. Vanessa documented each one in her mind, fury building with every discovery. She washed their hair with her own rose-scented soap, watching the water turn gray with grime. The girl's hair, when clean, was a surprising shade of honey gold. The boy's was darker, almost auburn in the light. "You're both so beautiful," Vanessa murmured, toweling the girl dry with gentle hands. "So perfect." The boy allowed her to dry him off, but still wouldn't meet her eyes. When Vanessa tried to brush his hair, he flinched, and she saw the small scar on his scalp, barely healed, raised and angry. "What happened to you?" she whispered. The boy pulled away, wrapping himself in the towel. Vanessa dressed them in clothes she'd been saving, a collection of baby garments she'd sewn during her first pregnancy and never had the heart to throw away. They were too big on the girl and too small on the boy, but they were clean and soft and smelled like the lavender she'd packed them with. She was brushing the girl's hair when Samuel came in from the barn. He stopped in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he took in the sight of his wife with the children, looking for all the world like a family. "I talked to some of the hands," he said quietly. "No one's heard anything about missing children. No posters, no inquiries." "Because no one's looking," Vanessa said. "Or because they're not from around here." Samuel moved closer, crouching down to the boy's level. "Son, I need you to understand something. My wife and I, we want to help you, but we can't do that unless you tell us what happened, where you came from, who did this to you." The boy's jaw trembled, and for a moment Vanessa thought he might actually speak, but then he pressed his lips together and shook his head. Samuel sighed and stood up. "I'm going to ride over to the Johnson place, then the McMasters. If these kids came from one of the neighboring ranches, someone will know." After he left, Vanessa tried a different approach. She sat on the floor with the children and pulled out her button box, a wooden container filled with hundreds of buttons of every size and color. Something her mother had given her years ago. "Would you like to play?" she asked, spilling buttons across the braided rug. The girl immediately dove into the pile, laughing as buttons scattered. The boy watched with wary interest. Vanessa began sorting the buttons by color, making neat piles. "See, red ones here, blue ones here. Can you help me find all the green ones?" Slowly, hesitantly, the boy reached out and picked up a green button. He placed it carefully in the pile Vanessa had indicated. "That's perfect," Vanessa encouraged. "You're very good at this." They played in silence for a while, the only sounds the click of buttons and the girl's occasional squeals of delight. It was during this quiet moment that Vanessa made a decision. "I'm going to call you Thomas," she said to the boy. "Just for now, until you can tell me your real name. And you," she touched the girl's head gently, "you'll be Rose, is that all right?" The boy, Thomas, looked at her with those ancient eyes, and Vanessa could have sworn she saw something like gratitude there. Thomas and Rose, she repeated. You're safe here, I promise you that. That night, Vanessa made them a proper bed in the spare room, the room that had been waiting for children for 6 years. She lined up the pillows just so, tucked in the quilts that had belonged to her grandmother, and tried not to think about the 3 little graves on the hill. Rose fell asleep almost immediately, her thumb in her mouth, one hand tangled in Vanessa's apron. Thomas lay awake longer, his eyes tracking every shadow, every sound. Would you like me to stay? Vanessa asked softly. Just until you fall asleep? Thomas nodded, barely, but definitely. So Vanessa sat on the floor beside the bed, her hand resting where Thomas could see it, and hummed the lullabies her own mother had sung to her. She was still humming when Samuel came home near midnight, his face etched with exhaustion. Nothing, he said when she joined him in the kitchen. No one's seen them. No one's heard anything. It's like they appeared out of thin air. Vanessa poured him coffee, her hands steady despite the storm raging in her heart. Maybe they did. Samuel looked at her sharply. Vanessa, maybe God finally answered my prayers, she continued, her voice soft but fierce. Maybe he sent them to us because he knew they needed us and we needed them. That's not how it works. Samuel's voice was gentle but firm. We can't keep them, Vanessa. They're not ours. Then whose are they? Vanessa challenged. Who's coming for them, Samuel? Who's looking? The silence between them was answer enough, but just because no one had come yet didn't mean no one would. By the third morning, Vanessa had started to hope, dangerous, foolish hope that wrapped around her heart like honeysuckle and refused to let go. Thomas had smiled, just once, barely a ghost of expression when Rose had sneezed so hard she'd fallen backward onto her bottom. But it was enough to make Vanessa's breath catch. And Rose, sweet Rose, had started calling her Mama, though Vanessa firmly corrected her each time. I'm Mrs. Brennan, Vanessa would say gently, even as the word Mama threaded itself through her chest like gold wire. Samuel had stopped correcting either of them. He'd also stopped mentioning the sheriff, the children's home in Cheyenne, or anything else that involved the children leaving. Instead, he had spent the past 2 days building a small wagon that Thomas could pull Rose around in, a wooden horse that rocked on curved slats, toys fashioned from scrap lumber with hands that had built a homestead but had forgotten how to be gentle. Vanessa caught him sometimes, watching the children with an expression that was equal parts wonder and grief. They didn't talk about it. They were Brennans, after all, and Brennans didn't discuss things that hurt too much to speak aloud. But on the third morning, everything changed. Vanessa was kneading bread while Thomas sat at the table, carefully copying letters onto a slate she'd found in the attic, her teaching tools from the brief time she'd tried to start a school in Redemption Creek. Rose was playing with the button bomb, sorting them in ways only she understood. Then Thomas's hands stilled, his whole body went rigid as stone. Thomas? Vanessa wiped her hands on her apron, alarmed. What's wrong? The boy's eyes were fixed on the window, his face pale as milk. Following his gaze, Vanessa saw dust rising in the distance, a wagon approaching at speed. It's all right, Vanessa soothed, even as her own heart began to race. It's probably just a neighbor coming to. Thomas was off the chair and running before Vanessa could finish the sentence. He grabbed Rose, who protested with a squeal, and dragged her toward the bedroom they had been sleeping in. Thomas, wait! But the boy was already pulling his sister under the bed, his movements frantic and terrifyingly practiced. This was something he'd done before, many times before. Vanessa's blood ran cold. The wagon drew closer. Vanessa could make out 2 figures now, a man and a woman, the man driving with hard, angry movements. Samuel emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. He'd seen the wagon too. He glanced toward the house, and Vanessa understood the question in his eyes. She nodded once. The children were hidden. The wagon pulled to a stop in a cloud of dust. The man who climbed down was tall and thick-necked, with a face that reminded Vanessa of meat left too long in the sun. The woman was younger, harder, with eyes like chips of flint. You, Brennan? The man called out, his voice carrying the kind of authority that expected immediate obedience. I am, Samuel replied, his tone carefully neutral. What can I do for you folks? Name's Carlisle, Frank Carlisle. This is my wife, Helen. He jerked a thumb toward the woman. We're looking for two children, boy and a girl. Sheriff Tucker mentioned you might have seen them. Vanessa stepped out onto the porch, her flowery hands hidden in her apron. Why are you looking for them? Helen Carlisle's mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile on someone with a soul. Because they're ours. Our nephew and niece, their mother, Frank's sister, died a few months back, and we've been caring for them since. Caring for them, Vanessa repeated, her voice flat. That's right, Frank said, his eyes narrowing. Now, we heard you found two children in the storm 3 days ago. That about right? Samuel's jaw tightened, but he nodded. We found children. Whether they're yours remains to be seen. Well, bring them out then, Frank demanded. Let's have a look. They're sleeping, Vanessa said quickly, and they've been through a terrible ordeal. They need rest, not to be disturbed by... They need to come home, Helen interrupted coldly, with their family, where they belong. The word family made Vanessa want to laugh or scream. She could see the bruises on Thomas in her mind's eye, the way he'd hidden under the bed with the practiced ease of someone who'd learned that survival meant making yourself invisible. I'll need to see some proof, Samuel said, that they're actually your kin. Frank's face darkened. You calling us liars? I'm saying that children don't hide under beds from people who love them, Samuel replied, his voice deadly quiet. And they don't have bruises in the shape of adult hands from falling downstairs. The temperature in the yard dropped about 20 degrees. Helen Carlisle's eyes went cold and hard. What we do with our family is our business, not yours. And certainly not some barren woman's who's so desperate for babies she'd steal someone else's. Vanessa felt the word barren like a slap, but she didn't flinch. I found them abandoned in a storm, left to die. If that's how you treat family, Mr. and Mrs. Carlisle, then I'd hate to see how you treat your enemies. You watch your mouth, Frank growled, taking a step toward the porch. Samuel immediately moved to intercept, his hand resting casually but obviously on the revolver at his hip. I think you should leave, Samuel said. Come back with the sheriff and proper documentation proving your claim. Until then, those children stay right where they are. Frank's hand moved toward his own gun, and for a heart-stopping moment, Vanessa thought they were about to witness bloodshed. But Helen grabbed her husband's arm. This isn't over, she hissed. Those children are ours by law, and we will get them back. Maybe you should ask yourself why they ran from you in the first place, Vanessa called out as they climbed back into their wagon. Frank Carlisle turned, his face twisted with rage. You have no idea what you're dealing with, Mrs. Brennan. No idea at all. Then they were gone, leaving nothing but dust and the kind of dread that settles in your bones. Vanessa and Samuel stood frozen until the wagon disappeared over the ridge. Then Vanessa was running into the house, through the kitchen, into the bedroom where Thomas and Rose had hidden. They're gone, she called out softly. It's safe now. Slowly, Thomas emerged from under the bed, pulling Rose with him. The girl was crying quietly. The boy's face was expressionless, but his hands were shaking. Thomas, Vanessa knelt in front of him, forcing him to meet her eyes. Were those the people who hurt you? Thomas didn't nod, didn't shake his head, but the answer was written in every tense line of his small body. They're not taking you, Vanessa said fiercely. Do you hear me? I don't care what the law says. I don't care who they claim to be. They're not taking you. Samuel appeared in the doorway. Vanessa, don't! Vanessa cut him off. Don't tell me about what's legal or proper. Those people hurt these children. You saw his face. You saw how he reacted. I know. Samuel's voice was rough. But we need to be smart about this. If they have legal claim, then we'll fight it. Vanessa stood up, Rose in her arms. Thomas pressed against her side. We'll find a way. But even as she said it, Vanessa knew the truth. The law rarely sided with the vulnerable, especially not in the Wyoming territory, where might too often made right and children were considered property. They needed proof, evidence, something more substantial than bruises and terrified silence. They had 2 days before the Carlisles would return with documentation and the weight of the law behind them. 2 days to save Thomas and Rose from a fate Vanessa couldn't bear to imagine. Vanessa spent that afternoon like a woman possessed, tearing through every drawer, every box, searching for something she'd packed away years ago when her teaching dreams had died along with her third pregnancy. What are you looking for? Samuel asked, watching her dump the contents of their storage trunk across the bedroom floor. My father's law books, Vanessa muttered, pushing aside winter blankets and Samuel's good suit. He taught at the college, but he practiced law before that. I know I kept them. I know it. Vanessa, we need a real lawyer. We can't afford a real lawyer. Vanessa spun around, her hair falling from its pins and her eyes wild. And even if we could, do you think any lawyer in Redemption Creek would go against the Carlyles? Did you see the way that man looked at us? That's not the look of someone who expects to lose. Samuel crouched down, stilling her frantic hands with his own. Then we'll go to Cheyenne. We'll find someone there. We don't have time. Vanessa's voice cracked. They'll be back in 2 days with papers, Samuel. Papers that probably say they're legal guardians. And what do we have? Just our word that we found these children in a storm. Thomas appeared in the doorway then, Rose trailing behind him. The boy watched them with those two knowing eyes, and Vanessa felt her heart crack a little more. I'm sorry, she said, though she wasn't sure if she was apologizing to the children or to her husband. I'm sorry, Thomas walked across the room and took Vanessa's hand. It was the first time he'd touched her of his own volition. His small fingers threaded through hers, and he pulled her gently toward the door. What is it? Vanessa asked, letting herself be led. What do you need? Thomas brought her to the kitchen table where his slate still sat. While Samuel and Vanessa watched, the boy picked up the chalk and began to draw. Not letters this time, pictures. He drew a house, bigger than the Brennan homestead, with multiple windows and a barn. Then he drew stick figures, a woman, a man, two smaller figures. He put X marks over the woman in one of the small figures. Vanessa's throat tightened. Your mother? And a sister? Or brother? Thomas nodded, his hand moving again. He drew another man, this one larger, with angry slashes around him. Then he drew himself in Rose, but smaller, pushed to the corner of the slate. Your uncle, Samuel said quietly. Frank Carlyle. Another nod. Thomas's hands shook as he drew more. Violent, disturbing images that no child should have to communicate. Hands raised to strike. Children cowering. And then, chillingly, he drew what looked like a door with an X on it. He locked you in, Vanessa breathed. He locked you away. Thomas set down the chalk and looked at her with eyes that begged her to understand, to believe, to save them. I believe you, Vanessa said, pulling him into a fierce hug. I believe you, Thomas, and we're going to make sure you never have to go back there. I promise. But promises were easy to make and hard to keep when the law was on the wrong side. That night, while the children slept and Samuel kept watch at the window, Vanessa sat at the table with her father's dusty law books and began to read by lamplight. Page after page of dense legal text, searching for something, anything that might help them. She found it near midnight in a chapter on guardianship and custody. In cases where there is evidence of physical abuse or neglect, the court may terminate guardianship rights and place the minor children with suitable parties until a formal hearing can be arranged. Samuel. Her voice was hoarse from reading aloud to herself. Look at this. He came to stand behind her, his hand resting on her shoulder as he read over her arm. Evidence, he said slowly. We need evidence. We have evidence, Vanessa insisted. The bruises will have faded by the time we get in front of a judge, Samuel finished grimly. We need something more, something documented. Vanessa's mind raced. Dr. Morrison. He was here last month for that calf birth. If we could get him to examine the children, write a medical report, it's worth a try. Samuel squeezed her shoulder. I'll ride out first light. But even as they made plans, Vanessa couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something. Something important that Thomas had been trying to tell them with his pictures, but couldn't quite communicate. She found out the next morning. Vanessa was changing Rose's clothes. The girl had spilled milk down her front during breakfast, when she noticed something odd. A mark on Rose's back, just above her hip. At first, Vanessa thought it was a bruise, but as she looked closer, she realized it was too precise, too deliberate. It was a burn, a small, crescent-shaped burn that looked eerily like the curve of a horseshoe. Samuel, Vanessa called out, her voice shaking. Samuel, come here. When he saw it, his face went white with rage. That's not an accident. No, Vanessa agreed, her hands trembling as she gently pulled Rose's dress back down. That's a brand. like cattle, like property. Thomas had been hovering near the door, and when Vanessa looked at him, she saw confirmation in his eyes. He turned around and lifted his shirt, revealing a similar mark on his shoulder blade. My God, Samuel breathed. Vanessa felt something inside her shift, something fundamental and irreversible. Whatever maternal instinct had been building in her over the past 3 days solidified into pure protective fury. Get Dr. Morrison, she said, her voice ice cold. Get him here today. I don't care what you have to do. Vanessa, and then get me paper and ink. I'm writing to everyone I can think of. The territorial governor, the marshal, anyone with the authority to stop this. She looked at Thomas and Rose, these broken, brave children who'd survived horrors she could barely imagine. They marked these babies like animals. I will burn that entire ranch to the ground before I let them do it again. Samuel had never heard his wife speak with such venom. He'd never seen her eyes flash with that particular shade of righteous fury. He found it terrifying and magnificent. I'll be back by noon, he promised. Dr. Morrison came. He examined both children while Vanessa held their hands and Samuel stood guard at the door. The doctor's face grew grimmer with each discovery. The burns, the bruises in various stages of healing, Thomas's fractured ribs that had set wrong, Rose's fingers that had been broken and never properly treated. This is systematic abuse, Dr. Morrison said, his normally jovial face hard as granite. This isn't discipline or accidents. This is torture. He wrote a 3-page report in his meticulous hand, documenting every injury, every scar. He signed it, dated it, and pressed his official seal into the wax. I'll testify, he said firmly, anywhere, anytime. These children are not going back to whoever did this. Vanessa felt the first flutter of real hope. They had documentation now, evidence, a respected doctor's word. But they still had one more night before the Carlyles returned. One more night to prepare for the fight of their lives. The Carlyles came back at dawn, and they didn't come alone. Vanessa saw them from the bedroom window where she'd been keeping watch. 3 wagons instead of 1, filled with hard-looking men she recognized as hands from the Carlyle ranch. And riding alongside them, Sheriff Tucker, his face carefully neutral. Samuel, she called out softly, not wanting to wake the children. They're here. Her husband was already dressed, had been for hours. He'd spent most of the night cleaning his rifle and checking his revolvers, moving with the methodical precision of a man preparing for war. Get the children, he said. Keep them inside, no matter what you hear. Samuel Brennan, if you think I'm hiding in this house, well, I need you to protect them, Samuel interrupted, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. If something happens to me, Vanessa, I need you to take those children and run. Don't stop. Don't look back. You understand? Vanessa understood. She also had no intention of running. She woke Thomas and Rose as gently as possible. Though Thomas was already awake, his small body rigid with tension. He'd heard the wagons, the men's voices, carrying on the morning air. Stay with me, Vanessa told them, pulling Rose into her lap and tucking Thomas against her side. No matter what happens, you stay right here. Through the bedroom window, Vanessa could see Samuel walking out to meet the approaching group. He moved with deliberate calm, his rifle held loosely but obviously in his hands. Morning, Sam, Sheriff Tucker called out, dismounting. I'm sorry about this, but I've got a legal situation here that needs resolving. I'm sure you do, Samuel replied, but I've got one too. Frank Carlyle climbed down from his wagon, that same meat-red face split with a triumphant smile. He waved a sheaf of papers. Got the documentation right here. Guardianship papers signed by the territorial judge, stating that my wife and I have full legal custody of Daniel and Emma Carlyle, minor children of my late sister, Mary. Vanessa felt Thomas flinch at the names. Daniel and Emma. Bummer, not Thomas and Rose. Well, that's interesting, Samuel said, his voice carrying through the open window, because I've got documentation too, from Dr. Morrison. 3 pages detailing the systematic abuse these children suffered at your hands. The triumphant smile faltered. What? Burns, Samuel continued, his voice hard as iron. Shaped like horseshoes, broken bones that healed wrong, fractured ribs, all documented and signed by a medical professional. And Dr. Morrison is prepared to testify in court that these injuries were inflicted deliberately, repeatedly. Sheriff Tucker's expression changed. Frank, what's he talking about? He's talking nonsense, Frank blustered. Kids fall down. Kids get hurt. That's just... You branded them. Vanessa's voice rang out as she appeared on the porch. Dr. Morrison's report clutched in her hand. Rose clung to her skirt, and Thomas stood at her side like a small soldier. You branded these babies like cattle, and you think we're just going to hand them back to you? Helen Carlisle's face had gone pale. That's a lie. She's lying. Then let's settle this right now, Sheriff Tucker said, his voice hard. Mrs. Brennan, bring those children here. Over my dead body, Vanessa said flatly. The tension in the yard crystallized into something dangerous. The Carlisle Ranch hands shifted, hands moving toward weapons. Samuel's grip on his rifle tightened. Vanessa, Tucker said carefully, I don't want anyone getting hurt here, but I need to see those children. I need to verify what you're claiming. Then come look, Vanessa said. Just you, Sheriff. Not them. Never them. Tucker nodded slowly and dismounted, walking toward the porch with his hands visible and empty. Frank made to follow, but Samuel's rifle came up with a click that echoed like thunder. You stay right where you are, Samuel said softly. Tucker climbed the porch steps, his weathered face creased with concern. Vanessa knelt down, speaking softly to Rose and Thomas. The sheriff needs to see babies, just to prove what bad people those folks are. Can you be brave for me? Thomas looked at the sheriff, then at Vanessa, then back at Tucker. Slowly he nodded. Show him, Thomas, Vanessa said gently. The boy turned around and lifted his shirt. Tucker's sharp intake of breath was audible even from the yard. He crouched down, examining the burn scar, shaped unmistakably like a horseshoe, deliberate and cruel. Jesus Christ, Tucker muttered. Then, the little one too? Vanessa lifted Rose's dress just enough to show the matching mark. When Tucker stood up, his face had transformed from carefully neutral to openly disgusted. He walked back down the steps, stopping in front of Frank Carlisle. You're going to turn that wagon around, Tucker said, his voice deadly quiet. And you're going to get off this property. Right now. What? No, I have legal guardianship. You have jack shit, Tucker interrupted. You branded these children. I saw it with my own eyes. Whatever papers you've got, they're not worth the ink they're written in, Salim. This is outrageous. You can't just... Tucker stepped closer, and something in his expression made Frank Carlisle take an involuntary step back. I'm giving you to the count of 10 to get off Brennan property, and then I'm going to arrest you for child abuse, assault, and anything else I can think of. Your choice. This isn't over, Helen Carlisle hissed. We'll take this to the territorial court. We'll... 1, Tucker started counting. The Carlisles retreated, but not gracefully. Frank hurled threats and curses as his men helped him back into the wagon. Helen's face was twisted with such hatred that Vanessa instinctively pulled the children closer. You'll regret this, Frank shouted as the wagons began to turn. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Those children are mine by right, and I will get them back. 10, Tucker finished, his hand on his gun. The wagons fled in a cloud of dust and fury. When they were gone, the silence that settled over the Brennan homestead felt fragile as spun glass. Samuel lowered his rifle, but his hands were shaking. Vanessa realized she was crying, though she couldn't remember when the tears had started. Tucker turned to face them, his expression weary. You folks know what you just did? The Carlisles, they're connected. Frank's brother sits on the territorial legislature. They've got money, influence, friends in high places. I don't care, Vanessa said. You should, Tucker replied, but not unkindly. This is going to get ugly. They'll fight this in court, and they might win. The law, well, the law doesn't always do what's right. Then we'll change the law, Samuel said. Tucker laughed, short and bitter. I admire your optimism, Sam, I truly do. But in the meantime, you need to understand what you're up against. We understand, Vanessa said firmly, and we're not backing down. Tucker nodded slowly, then looked at the children, Thomas and Rose, clinging to Vanessa like she was the only solid thing in a tilting world. Off the record? Tucker said quietly. I hope to hell you win. but you're going to need more than hope and righteous anger. You're going to need a lawyer, a good one, and you're going to need to move fast because Frank Carlisle is going to use every resource he has to bury you. After Tucker left, Samuel and Vanessa stood in their yard with the children between them, facing the reality of what they'd just started. "We can't keep them," Samuel said finally. "Not like this, not without proper legal adoption." "Then we'll adopt them," Vanessa said simply. "Vanessa, it's not that easy." "Then we'll make it that easy." She looked at her husband with eyes that had seen too much but refused to look away. "These are our children now, Samuel. I don't care what the law says or what papers need signing. They're ours, and no one is taking them from us." Samuel looked at Thomas and Rose, at these broken, brave children who'd somehow found their way to his doorstep. He thought about the empty bedroom, the 3 graves on the hill, the 6 years of silence and grief that had nearly destroyed his marriage. And he made a choice. "All right," he said, "then we fight." But fighting meant they needed ammunition. And in the Wyoming Territory of 1888, ammunition meant money and connections and legal expertise they didn't have. What they did have was 3 days before the Carlisles could file their petition with the territorial court. 3 days to turn found children into our children in the eyes of the law. 3 days to build an unbreakable case. Starting now, the lawyer came from Cheyenne, summoned by a telegraph that cost Samuel nearly $20. Money they didn't have but spent anyway because what good was money if it couldn't buy justice? His name was Marcus Whitfield, and he was nothing like Vanessa expected. She'd pictured someone old and severe, wrapped in expensive suits and condescension. Instead, Whitfield was barely 30, with ink-stained fingers and a face that suggested he'd seen enough of humanity's cruelty to be permanently unimpressed by it. "Show me everything," he said before he'd even properly introduced himself. So they did. Dr. Morrison's report, the children themselves with their scars and their silence, Thomas's slate drawings carefully preserved, and finally Vanessa's own meticulous documentation, pages of notes detailing every bruise, every flinch, every nightmare that woke Rose screaming in the dark. Whitfield read it all with the focused intensity of a man assembling a weapon. When he finished, he sat back in the Brennan's kitchen chair and steepled his fingers. "This is good," he said. "This is very good, but it's not enough." Vanessa felt her heart sink. "What do you mean it's not enough? You saw those burns." "I did, and any decent judge will be horrified by them. But Frank Carlisle has legal guardianship papers signed by Judge Patterson, who happens to be a friend of the family. Patterson will argue that the children were being disciplined for their own good, that frontier life is harsh and sometimes harsh measures are necessary." Whitfield's mouth twisted with disgust. "It's bullshit, but it's bullshit that might hold up in court." "Then what do we need?" Samuel asked. "We need to prove that the guardianship itself was obtained fraudulently. We need to show that Frank Carlisle lied on his original application, or that he gained custody through deception, or—" Whitfield paused, his eyes sharpening. "Where's the mother buried?" The question caught them off guard. We don't know," Vanessa admitted. "Daniel, hasn't been able to tell us." Whitfield turned to the boy, who'd been sitting silently at the table, watching this stranger with wary eyes. "Daniel, I need you to help. Where did your mother live? Where is she buried?" Thomas's face went pale, but he reached for his slate. With shaking hands, he began to draw. A church with a tall steeple, a graveyard, what looked like mountains in the background. "That's St. Michael's," Samuel said suddenly, "in Silver Creek, about 20 miles north." "Then that's where we start," Whitfield said, standing up. "We're going to find that grave, and we're going to find out exactly how Mary Carlisle died, because I'm willing to bet my license that there's something in that story that Frank doesn't want anyone looking into." They left at dawn the next morning, Samuel, Whitfield, and Sheriff Tucker, who'd agreed to come along in an official capacity. Vanessa wanted to go too, but someone needed to stay with the children, and Tucker had been firm. "If Frank gets wind of what we're doing, he might try something. Keep those kids out of sight." So Vanessa watched them ride away, then turned back to the house where Thomas and Rose waited. The boy had been even quieter than usual since Whitfield's arrival, his small face pinched with worry. "They're going to help us," Vanessa told him, pulling him close. Mr. Whitfield is going to make sure you never have to go back. But Thomas didn't look convinced. And to be honest, Vanessa wasn't entirely convinced either. She spent the day trying to maintain normalcy, baking bread, teaching Rose her letters, coaxing Thomas to eat, but her mind was in Silver Creek, imagining what they might find. They returned near sunset, and Vanessa knew immediately from their faces that they'd found something. "Tell me," she demanded. "Mary Carlisle died 6 months ago," Whitfield said, spreading papers across the kitchen table. "Supposedly from scarlet fever, but the undertaker in Silver Creek, a man named Hoskins, he remembers her, said she came in looking like she'd been beaten half to death. Bruises everywhere, broken ribs, a fractured skull." Vanessa's hand flew to her mouth. "Hoskins wanted to report it to the sheriff," Tucker continued, his face grim. "But Mary begged him not to. Said her brother would kill her if anyone found out. She died 3 days later, and Frank had her buried before anyone could ask questions." "He killed her," Vanessa breathed. "He killed his own sister." "We can't prove that," Whitfield cautioned. "Not definitively, but Hoskins is willing to testify about her injuries. And we found something else." He pulled out another document. Mary's will, written 2 years ago, stating clearly that if anything happened to her, her children were to be placed with her husband's family in Ohio, not with Frank. "But her husband," Samuel started, "died in a mining accident a year before Mary," Whitfield finished. "Frank knew about the will. He had to have known. But he petitioned for guardianship anyway, claiming there was no other family. That's fraud. Clear, prosecutable fraud." Vanessa felt hope bloom in her chest like a desert flower after rain. "So we can stop him? We can keep the children?" "If we move fast," Whitfield said. "I'm filing an emergency petition with the territorial court tomorrow morning. We're asking for an immediate suspension of Frank's guardianship rights in temporary custody for you and Samuel pending a full hearing." "How long will that take?" Samuel asked. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Whitfield began gathering his papers. "In the meantime, you need to keep these children safe. Frank's going to know what we're doing the moment I file, and he's not going to take it well." That night, Samuel reinforced the doors and checked his ammunition. Vanessa sat with the children, reading them stories from her father's old books, trying to pretend that everything was going to be fine. Thomas fell asleep with his head in her lap, his small hand fisted in her skirt. Rose curled against her side, sucking her thumb. Looking at them, Vanessa felt her heart swell with a fierce, protective love that she thought died with her last pregnancy. "I won't let anyone hurt you," she whispered. "I promise." But promises were fragile things, and the night was full of threats she couldn't see. Around midnight, they heard it, the sound of horses approaching at speed. Samuel was at the window in an instant, his rifle in his hands. "6 riders," he said quietly. "Maybe 7. Vanessa's blood went cold. "What is it?" "It's them." The Carlyles had come to take their property back, and they hadn't come to talk. "Get the children into the root cellar," Samuel said, his voice deadly calm in a way that terrified Vanessa more than shouting would have. "Now, Vanessa." But Vanessa had already moved, scooping Rose into her arms and pulling Thomas along behind her. The root cellar was accessed through a trapdoor in the kitchen floor, small, dark, and cold, but safe as anywhere could be. "I'll be right back," Vanessa promised, even as Rose began to whimper. "I promise, babies. Just stay quiet, stay hidden." Thomas looked at her with those ancient eyes, and Vanessa saw that he understood exactly what was happening. He'd been through this before. The hiding, the fear, the sound of angry men coming in the night. "Stay with your sister," Vanessa told him. "Keep her quiet, no matter what you hear." Then she closed the trap door and threw the rug over it. Samuel had moved to the front window, using the wall for cover. "There's 8 of them, all armed, Frank's leading." Vanessa grabbed the shotgun from above the fireplace, the one her father had taught her to shoot when she was 12, back when Boston felt like another world. Her hands were steady as she broke it open, checked the load, snapped it closed. "You know how to use that?" Samuel asked. "I grew up in Boston, not paradise," Vanessa replied. "What's the plan?" "We don't shoot unless they force us to," Samuel said, "but we make damn sure they know we will if we have to." The riders stopped about 30 yards from the house, staying carefully out of rifle range. Frank Carlyle sat his horse in the center, his face illuminated by the torch one of his men carried. "Brennan," he shouted, "send out my children, and we'll leave peacefully. This is your one chance." Samuel opened the front door but stayed behind cover. "The children aren't here, Carlyle. They're somewhere safe, somewhere you'll never find them." It was a bluff, a desperate, dangerous bluff, but it was all they had. Frank's laugh was ugly. "You think I'm stupid? I've been watching your house all day. Nobody left. Nobody came. Those kids are in there, and you're going to hand them over or we're going to come in and take them." "You try to come through that door," Vanessa called out, surprising herself with the steel in her voice, "and I'll shoot you myself." "That's a big threat from a woman who's never fired a gun in anger," Frank sneered. "Try me." For a long moment, silence hung thick as smoke. Then Frank made a gesture, and his men began to dismount, spreading out in a semicircle around the house. "Last chance, Brennan," Frank called. "I have the law on my side. You're harboring children that don't belong to you. Hand them over, or you're both going to jail." "The law?" Samuel's voice was hard with contempt. "You mean the law that lets you brand babies like cattle? The law that lets you beat your sister to death and get away with it?" He'd said too much. They'd meant to keep Mary's death quiet until the hearing, but rage had loosened Samuel's tongue. Frank's face went white, then red, then purple with fury. "You son of a bitch. You've been digging where you had no right to dig. We've been to Silver Creek," Vanessa interrupted. "We talked to the undertaker. We know what you did to Mary. We know how she died." "You know nothing," Frank spat. "My sister was sick. She died of fever. Anyone who says different is a liar." "Then why does the undertaker remember her broken skull?" Samuel asked quietly. "Why does he remember the bruises?" The torchlight flickered across Frank's face, revealing something monstrous. "None of that matters. Those children are mine by law, and I will have them." He raised his hand and Vanessa saw what he was holding. Not a gun, but a bottle with a rag stuffed in the neck. A Molotov cocktail. "You burn us out," Samuel said, his voice still eerily calm. "And those children burn too. That what you want, Frank? You want them dead rather than free?" For a heartbeat, Vanessa thought Frank might actually fight it, that he might actually burn them all, rather than admit defeat. Then a new voice rang out across the yard. "Put it down, Carlyle, right now." Sheriff Tucker rode out of the darkness like an avenging angel, his rifle aimed directly at Frank's chest. Behind him came 4 more men, deputies from Redemption Creek, all armed, all looking grim as death. "What the hell is this?" Frank demanded. "This is the law," Tucker said. "Real law, not the bought and paid for kind. Mr. Whitfield filed his petition this morning. As of 3 hours ago, your guardianship rights have been temporarily suspended pending investigation into Mary Carlisle's death. Those children are now wards of the court, and the court has temporarily placed them with the Brennans." Tucker pulled a folded document from his coat. "This is official, signed by Judge Harrison in Cheyenne. You come near these children, you come near this property, and I'll arrest you for violating a court order. Clear?" Frank's face went through several colors before settling on a shade of rage that suggested apoplexy. "This isn't over. Harrison's a bleeding heart fool who has the authority to throw you in jail for contempt if you don't shut your mouth," Tucker interrupted. "Now you and your boys are going to turn around and ride back to your ranch, and you're going to stay there until the hearing in 2 weeks. Understood?" "This is outrageous. I have rights." "You have the right to remain silent," Tucker said. "I'd suggest you exercise it." The standoff lasted another tense minute. Then finally Frank Carlyle jerked his horse's head around and spurred away, his men following. But the look he shot back at the Brennan homestead promised that this war was far from over. After they left, Vanessa's legs nearly gave out. Samuel caught her, and they stood there in the doorway, holding each other up. "You can bring the children out now," Tucker said gently. Vanessa opened the trap door to find Thomas and Rose huddled together in the dark, the boy's arms wrapped protectively around his sister. When they saw Vanessa's face, saw that she was crying, Thomas's expression crumpled. "It's all right," Vanessa managed through her tears. "We're safe. You're safe. They're gone." She lifted them both out and Samuel wrapped his arms around all 3 of them. his wife and these children who weren't yet legally theirs but belonged to them in every way that mattered. 2 weeks, Tucker said. You have 2 weeks until the hearing. Whitfield thinks he can win, but Carlisle's not going down easy. He'll bring every lawyer and every connection he has. Let him, Vanessa said fiercely, her face pressed against Thomas's hair. Let him bring an army. He's not taking our children. Our children. She'd said it without thinking, but once the words were out, Vanessa knew they were true. Whatever happened at that hearing, whatever the law decided, these were her children now. She'd fight heaven and hell to keep them. The 2 weeks before the hearing passed in a strange combination of domestic peace and simmering dread. Vanessa threw herself into establishing routines, teaching Thomas his letters properly, working with Rose on simple words, making the children feel like this house was truly home. Thomas had started talking, not much and never about what had happened before, but small things. Thank you, when Vanessa served him breakfast. Yes, ma'am, when Samuel asked him to help with chores. And once, just once, in a voice so soft Vanessa almost missed it, I like it here. Those 4 words made Vanessa cry into her dishwater. Rose had attached herself to Vanessa with the fierce devotion of a child who'd learned that love was a temporary thing, something that could be ripped away without warning. She followed Vanessa everywhere, her small hand perpetually fisted in Vanessa's skirts, and she'd started calling her mama again. This time, Vanessa didn't correct her. But underneath the normalcy, the threat of the hearing loomed like a storm cloud. Whitfield came by twice more, preparing them for what to expect, drilling them on potential questions, building their case with the methodical precision of a man assembling a cathedral from matchsticks. They'll try to paint you as unstable, he warned Vanessa. Frank's lawyer will bring up your difficulties, your losses. He meant her miscarriages. Vanessa felt the old shame try to rise up, but she pushed it down. I'm not ashamed of my grief. Good, because they'll try to use it against you. They'll suggest that you're so desperate for children that you can't think rationally, that you've projected your own needs onto these kids. That's ridiculous, Samuel interjected. Of course it is, but it might work. Whitfield's face was grave. We need to be prepared for every angle. Frank Carlisle is fighting for his reputation, his standing in the community. He'll do anything to win. The night before the hearing, Vanessa couldn't sleep. She sat in the rocking chair in Thomas and Rose's room, watching them sleep in the bed Samuel had carved for them, and tried to pray. She wasn't sure God was listening anymore. He certainly hadn't been listening 6 years ago when she'd begged him to let her keep just one baby, but she tried anyway. Please, she thought, please let them stay. I'll be good. I'll be better. Just let me keep them. Samuel found her there near dawn, her eyes red from crying. Whatever happens, he said softly, we did the right thing. The right thing might not be enough, Vanessa whispered. The territorial courthouse in Cheyenne was nothing like Vanessa had imagined. She'd pictured something grand and imposing, but it was just a 2-story wooden building that looked like it might blow over in a strong wind. Inside, the courtroom was cramped and hot, packed with curious townspeople who had heard about the case. Frank and Helen Carlisle sat at one table with their lawyer, a man named Sutton, who looked like he charged by the word. Samuel and Vanessa sat at another with Whitfield, and between them in the judge's chamber waited Thomas and Rose, too young to testify, but old enough to be examined if the judge deemed it necessary. Judge Harrison was older than Vanessa expected, with white hair and eyes that suggested he'd seen every variety of human foolishness and been disappointed by all of it. He gavelled the court to order with the weary air of a man who'd rather be anywhere else. This is a petition to terminate the guardianship of Frank and Helen Carlisle over minors Daniel and Emma Carlisle, and to grant adoption rights to Samuel and Vanessa Brennan, he intoned. Mr. Sutton, your opening statement. What followed was 3 hours of legal maneuvering so complex that Vanessa's head spun. Sutton argued that the Brennans had kidnapped the children, had poisoned their minds against their legal guardians, had obtained Dr. Morrison's report through coercion and lies. He painted Frank as a concerned uncle trying to care for his late sister's children, and the Brennans as interfering busybodies who'd overstepped their bounds. Then it was Whitfield's turn. He started with the burns, presented photographs that Dr. Morrison had taken, stark black and white images, that made several people in the gallery gasp. He called the doctor to the stand, had him detail every injury in clinical, devastating precision. Then he called the undertaker from Silver Creek. Hoskins was a small, nervous man who looked like he'd rather be buried himself than testify. But his memory was sharp, and his testimony was damning. He described Mary Carlisle's injuries in detail, described how she'd begged him not to report her brother, described the fear in her eyes. "And did she say anything else?" Whitfield pressed. "Yes, sir," she said. Hoskins swallowed hard. "She said she was afraid for her children, that if anything happened to her, Frank would have them, and they'd end up just like her." The courtroom erupted. Judge Harrison had to gavel 3 times to restore order. Sutton tried to discredit Hoskins, suggested he was misremembering, that Mary's injuries could have been from anything. But the damage was done. Then Whitfield presented Mary's will. Read it aloud, word for word, including the passage specifically stating that the children should go to their father's family in Ohio. "Mr. Carlisle knew about this will," Whitfield said. "He had to have known. Yet he petitioned for guardianship anyway, claiming there was no other family. That, Your Honor, is fraud." Finally, Whitfield called Vanessa to the stand. She was terrified. Her hands shook as she placed them on the Bible. Her voice trembled as she swore to tell the truth. But when Whitfield asked her to describe finding the children, something steadied in her. She told the story simply, without embellishment. The storm, the crying, the 2 babies huddled together in the mud, terrified and alone. She described how Thomas had hidden under the bed when he heard the Carlisles coming, how neither child had spoken for days because they were too afraid. "And what did you feel," Whitfield asked, "when you realized what had happened to them?" Vanessa looked directly at Judge Harrison. "I felt like I'd been given a purpose. For 6 years, I've asked God why he took my babies from me, why I couldn't be a mother. And then he sent me Thomas and Rose, and I understood. They needed me, and I needed them." Sutton's cross-examination was brutal. He brought up each miscarriage, made Vanessa describe them in excruciating detail. He suggested that she was emotionally unstable, that she'd transferred her grief onto the Carlisle children, that she couldn't distinguish between saving them and stealing them. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Brennan," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "that you'd do anything to have children, even if it meant destroying a man's reputation on the flimsiest of evidence?" Vanessa felt tears threaten, but she held them back. "I would do anything to protect children from being hurt." "Yes, wouldn't you?" The question hung in the air. Sutton had no answer. Judge Harrison called for a recess. Then after an hour that felt like a year, he returned. "I've reviewed all the evidence," he said, "and I've made my decision." Vanessa felt Samuel's hand find hers under the table. "But first," Harrison continued, "I want to see the children." They brought Thomas and Rose into the courtroom, and Vanessa watched every person's face change. It was one thing to hear about abused children in the abstract. It was another to see them, small and fragile, their eyes too wary, their bodies held with the careful tension of animals expecting to be struck. Thomas's gaze immediately found Vanessa, and something in his expression broke her heart. He was terrified, not of the courtroom or the judge, but of what the judge might decide. Judge Harrison looked at the children for a long moment. Then he looked at Frank Carlisle, and the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. "Mr. Carlisle," Harrison said, "I want you to explain something to me. These children have burn scars shaped like horseshoes. Dr. Morrison testified that these scars are consistent with deliberate branding, not accidents. How did those scars get there?" Frank's face had gone red. "The boy was playing near the forge. Both children have identical scars in different locations." Harrison interrupted. "Are you telling me they both had the same accident?" Silence. "I didn't think so." Harrison turned to Thomas. "Son, I need you to do something very brave. I need you to point to the person who hurt you." The courtroom held its breath. Thomas's small hand rose, trembling, and pointed directly at Frank Carlisle. "And the person who hurt your sister?" Thomas's hand didn't waver. "And the person who killed your mother?" "Your Honor!" Sutton was on his feet. "The boy is too young to—" "The boy," Harrison said, his voice like iron, "is old enough to know who caused him pain, "Sit down, Mr. Sutton." He turned back to Thomas. "Is that the man, son?" Thomas nodded. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, the first words most of the courtroom had heard him speak, he said if we told, he'd kill us too. The courtroom erupted again. Helen Carlisle had gone white as paper. Frank was shouting something, but Vanessa couldn't hear it over to the pounding of her own heart. Harrison gavelled for order, his face thunderous. When the room finally quieted, he spoke with the weight of absolute authority. "I've seen a lot of ugly things in my years on the bench, but this?" He shook his head. "Mr. and Mrs. Carlisle, your guardianship rights are hereby permanently terminated. Furthermore, I'm ordering an investigation into the death of Mary Carlisle. If the evidence supports murder charges, you will face trial." Frank lunged to his feet, but two deputies were already moving to restrain him. "And as for these children," Harrison continued, his voice softening slightly, "I'm granting temporary custody to Samuel and Vanessa Brennan, pending completion of formal adoption proceedings. The Brennans have 30 days to file adoption papers, which I fully expect to approve." Vanessa couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel Samuel's arm around her and Thomas's small hand finding hers. "Mama?" Rose's voice was uncertain. "We stay?" And Vanessa, this woman who'd been told for 6 years that she would never be a mother, who'd buried 3 babies and thought her heart had died with them, looked at her daughter, because Rose was her daughter now, and said, "Yes, baby, we stay. Forever." The rest happened in a blur. Whitfield shaking their hands, his usual composed expression cracking into a genuine smile. Sheriff Tucker congratulating them. Darach Morrison saying he'd make himself available for any follow-up the children needed. And through it all, Thomas and Rose clinging to Vanessa like she was the only solid thing in a tilting world. Outside the courthouse, with the Wyoming sun warm on their faces, Samuel pulled his family close. "We should head home," he said. "We've got a lot of work to do." "What work?" Vanessa asked, confused. "Well, those beds I built are already getting too small, and we'll need to add on to the house. Can't have just one children's room forever." He smiled, and Vanessa realized it was the first genuine smile she'd seen on her husband's face in years. "Might need a bigger barn too once Thomas is old enough to help with the cattle." Thomas looked up at him with something like hope. "Really? I can help?" "Really, you're a Brennan now. Brennans work the land together." Vanessa felt tears streaming down her face, but for once they weren't tears of grief. They rode home in the wagon Samuel had borrowed, Thomas and Rose sitting between them, looking at everything with new eyes, like they were seeing the world for the first time without fear. When they crested the last hill and the homestead came into view, Thomas let out a small kipaikiu. Vanessa followed his gaze and saw what had caught his attention. A swing, hanging from the big cottonwood tree near the house. Samuel must have built it before they left, hung it in secret while Vanessa was packing. "That's yours," Samuel told the children. "Yours and your sister's, and any other brothers or sisters who might come along." The words hung in the air, full of possibility. Vanessa met her husband's eyes over the children's heads and saw the future there, messy and complicated and probably full of challenges, but theirs, finally undeniably theirs. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Samuel and Vanessa stood on their porch and looked at the stars. The same stars that had watched them struggle through 6 years of loss and grief, that had seen them nearly break under the weight of their childless marriage. "Do you think they'll be all right?" Vanessa asked quietly. "Thomas and Rose, after everything they've been through?" Samuel considered the question. "I think they'll have nightmares. I think there will be hard days. But I also think—" He paused, searching for words. "I think children are stronger than we give them credit for. And I think having a home where they're safe, where they're loved, that'll make all the difference." "When do you think they'll call us Mama and Papa?" "Rose already calls you Mama." "But Thomas will do it when he's ready," Samuel finished. "We've got time, Vanessa, all the time in the world." But they had less time than they thought, because when Thomas spoke his next words, 3 weeks later, on an ordinary Tuesday while helping Samuel mend a fence, those words would change everything. The moment came during afternoon chores, with the sun hanging low and golden over the Wyoming mountains. Thomas had been helping Samuel repair the south fence line, mostly just handing him tools and watching. But Samuel included him in everything now, teaching him the rhythms of the land. They'd been working in comfortable silence when Thomas suddenly set down the hammer and looked at Samuel with those two old eyes that had finally started to look more like a child's. "Papa," he said. The word was soft, tentative, like he was trying it on to see if it fit. Samuel's hands stilled. He set down his tools and crouched to Thomas's level. "Say that again, son." "Papa?" More confident this time. "And is it all right if I call you that?" Samuel Brennan, who'd survived frontier winters and drought and 6 years of grief that would have broken a lesser man, felt his eyes burn with tears. "It's more than all right. It's perfect." Thomas's small face broke into a smile, a real smile, the first full, unguarded smile they'd seen from him. And then he said the words that would echo in Samuel and Vanessa's hearts for the rest of their lives. "I was scared you wouldn't want us. Me and Emma, Rose. I was scared you'd change your mind." Samuel pulled the boy into a fierce hug. "Never. You hear me? Never. You're ours now. Mine and your mama's. Forever." That evening, when Samuel told Vanessa what had happened, she cried so hard she couldn't speak. Rose patted her face with worried hands until Vanessa laughed through her tears and assured her that sometimes people cry because they are happy. "Really?" Rose asked. "Really," Vanessa confirmed. "Sometimes the best things make us cry the most." The adoption papers came through 6 weeks later. Judge Harrison had expedited the process, citing extraordinary circumstances and demonstrated unfitness of previous guardians. Thomas Daniel Brennan and Rose Emma Brennan, their names officially changed, officially theirs. Frank Carlisle never stood trial for Mary's murder. The evidence was circumstantial, and Sutton managed to argue it down to accidental death during a domestic dispute. But Frank's reputation was destroyed. He lost his seat in the territorial legislature, lost contracts with half the ranchers in the county, and eventually sold his ranch and disappeared into Montana territory. Vanessa didn't care where he went, as long as it was far away from her children. The nightmares persisted for months. Thomas would wake screaming about fire and locked doors. Rose would cry for her mother, for a woman she could barely remember. But Vanessa and Samuel were there every time, holding them until the fear passed and sleep returned. And slowly, gradually, the nightmares came less frequently. The fear faded. The children began to laugh. A year after the adoption, Vanessa discovered she was pregnant. The news sent her into a panic so severe that Samuel had to call Dr. Morrison to calm her down. "I can't lose another one," she kept saying. "I can't." But Dr. Morrison examined her and smiled. "Mrs. Brennan, I think you're going to be just fine. Some women's bodies just need to remember what it is to be a mother before they can carry a child." Sounds like nonsense, I know, but I've seen it happen. Vanessa didn't know if it was science or miracle, but 9 months later, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy they named James. Thomas and Rose were fascinated by their new brother, hovering over his cradle like guardian angels. "He's ours?" Thomas asked, touching James's tiny hand with reverent care. "He's ours," Vanessa confirmed. "He's your brother." The look on Thomas's face, pure, uncomplicated joy, made everything they'd been through worth it. Now, 3 years after that storm brought two terrified children to their doorstep, the Brennan homestead was a different place. The house had been expanded. Samuel had added 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. The barn had been rebuilt. The cattle operation had grown profitable enough to hire 2 ranch hands. But the biggest changes couldn't be measured in lumber or livestock. Thomas was 7 now, reading at a level that would have impressed Vanessa's professor father. He helped Samuel with the heavy work, and he'd stop flinching when men raised their voices. He still had nightmares sometimes, but they were rare now, just shadows of old pain that would probably never completely disappear. Rose was 4.5, loud and fearless, and convinced she could do anything her brothers could do. She followed Thomas everywhere, and she'd recently informed Vanessa that when she grew up, she was going to be a doctor so she could fix people who got hurted. And baby James was 2, toddling around the house and yard with the absolute confidence of a child who'd never known anything but love. One evening, as Vanessa stood on the porch watching Samuel teach Thomas how to rope a fence post, while Rose helped and James got in everyone's way, she felt a contentment so profound it was almost painful. "You all right?" Samuel asked, catching her expression. Vanessa smiled. "Better than all right. I was just thinking about that night. The storm. How terrified I was when I heard them crying. Best storm of my life, Samuel said. Best storm of mine, too. Vanessa watched Thomas successfully rope the post on his third try, watched Samuel's face light up with pride. We almost didn't get here, you know. We almost gave up, almost let the Carlyles take them. But we didn't. Samuel wrapped an arm around her waist. We fought. We fought, Vanessa agreed, and we won. Later, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Vanessa sat at her writing desk and began a letter to Whitfield, updating him on how the children were doing. She'd been writing to him periodically since the trial, partly out of gratitude and partly because he'd become an unexpected friend. Dear Marcus, you asked me once if I thought the children would recover from what they'd been through. I told you I didn't know, but I can tell you now, with 3 years of hindsight and evidence, they're not just recovering, they're thriving. Thomas called Samuel Papa for the first time last week without any hesitation. Rose told me yesterday that she doesn't remember being scared anymore. And James, well, James doesn't know there was ever a time when his brother and sister weren't part of this family. You also asked me if I thought all of this was worth it. The fighting, the court battle, the threats. The answer is yes, 1,000 times yes. Sometimes I think about that storm, about how close we came to just letting them go to the children's home in Cheyenne, how close we came to taking the easy path instead of the right one. And then I look at my children, all 3 of them, and I thank God for that storm, for the courage Samuel and I found when we needed it most, for people like you and Sheriff Tucker and Dr. Morrison who stood with us when it would have been easier to walk away. We didn't just save Thomas and Rose that night, Marcus. They saved us too. They saved a marriage that was dying of grief and silence. They gave us purpose when we'd forgotten what that felt like. So yes, it was worth it. Every terrifying, heartbreaking, beautiful moment of it. She signed the letter and set it aside to mail tomorrow. Then she walked through the quiet house, checking on each child one last time before bed. James was sprawled on his back, snoring softly. Rose was curled around her rag doll, her thumb in her mouth. And Thomas was awake, reading by lamplight. You should be sleeping, Vanessa said gently. I know, I just wanted to finish this chapter. He looked up at her with a smile. It's about a knight who saves a princess from a dragon. Sounds exciting. It is, but Thomas hesitated. Mama, do you think the knight was scared when he fought the dragon? Vanessa sat on the edge of his bed. I think he was probably terrified. But he did it anyway. Because being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what's right even when you are scared. Thomas considered this. Like you and Papa, when you fought Mr. Carlyle. Like that, yes. I'm glad you were brave, Thomas said quietly. I'm glad you didn't give up. Vanessa kissed his forehead. Me too, sweetheart. Now bed. Dragon fights can wait until tomorrow. She extinguished his lamp and was almost to the door when Thomas's voice stopped her. Mama, I love you. The words, so simple, so profound, filled Vanessa's heart until she thought it might burst. I love you too, Thomas. So very much. As she joined Samuel in their own bed that night, Vanessa thought about everything they'd been through. The losses, the grief, the terrifying night when Frank Carlyle had tried to burn them out. The court battle, the uncertainty, the fear that they might lose the children they had come to love so fiercely. And she thought about the moment she'd heard crying in the storm and made the decision to step outside. How different her life would be if she'd ignored it, if she'd let fear or caution or common sense keep her inside where it was safe. Samuel, she whispered into the darkness, do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gone outside that night? All the time, he admitted, and it terrifies me. Me too. They lay in silence for a moment. Then Samuel said, but you did go outside, you stepped into that storm, and you brought home our children. And that makes you the bravest person I know. Not brave, Vanessa corrected, just a mother who heard her babies crying. And that, in the end, was the truest thing she could have said. If this story touched your heart, I'd be grateful if you'd take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to fight for what's right, even when it seemed impossible? Your story might inspire someone else who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of courage, love, and the families we choose. Until next time, friends.